he woke to the relentless pulse of an emergency beacon echoing through the metallic corridors of the derelict station. Scraps of light flickered and died in the wide, darkening hallway, each luminous pulse capturing the scrawl of alien text on the walls. The man's name was Marcus Fell, an ex-salvage scout with a scar running across the bridge of his nose and an even deeper scar carved into his soul. His suit, patched in too many places to count, offered meager protection from the chill that invaded the halls. He was alone here. At least, that was what he told himself as he ventured deeper. The station, silent and entombed by starlight, felt like a labyrinth of metal bones adrift on the outskirts of a dying solar system. The unearthly gloom seeped into his mind as he pressed on, black cables dangling overhead like dead serpents, the floors slick with condensation. Each step whispered in echoes. He cursed under his breath when his foot slipped on a patch of frost. Where heat and oxygen came from, he couldn't guess. The life support system must have had just enough residual power to keep the place habitable. But it all felt vaguely haunted. He was used to that, though. In the salvage business, you learn to walk among ghosts. He ventured through the corridors until he found a half-functioning terminal, luminous with a soft violet glow. Its designs were alien, a kind of fractal geometry that scrolled from top to bottom in mesmerizing patterns. Occasionally it would glitch, fracturing the text into meaningless shapes. Marcus had run into 1,000 different languages in his short but intense lifetime of scavenging, but something about this script drew his eye. It felt alive, shifting under his gaze like it wanted him to read it. His breath caught in his throat. He'd sworn off the unknown after what happened at the Deveron Fields, that fiasco with the corporate raiders and a missing friend. No, not just a friend. He forced that memory aside. Gripping the console, he tried to focus. If the station's systems were still operational, maybe he could find the power node or the main flight deck. Then he heard something, a shuffle, like a footstep. He jerked around, adrenaline spiking. But the corridor lay empty. After a moment, he resumed his search, deciding it was just his nerves. He'd been haunted by illusions ever since that day everything went wrong. He reminded himself he was alone, nobody else was fool enough to come out here. Yet he felt eyes on him. The console beeped. A hidden door slid open, revealing a pathway draped in flickering overhead lights. The new corridor was narrower, enough that his shoulders brushed the walls. Deep, resonant hums echoed through it, vibrating up his legs and into his chest. He couldn't shake the sense of being guided, like the station had a will of its own. After he rounded 2 more corners, the corridor opened into a circular chamber. Icicles hung from conduits overhead, and the center was dominated by a hemispherical dais ringed by a translucent barrier of swirling energy. Beyond that barrier stood a figure, a woman, or something woman-shaped. She was tall, at least half a head taller than him, with a lithe grace that suggested coiled power. Her skin reflected the faint glow of the swirling barrier in a deep, dusky silver tone that shimmered. Vague patterns danced across her arms and shoulders as if tinted by the station's faint lights. Her eyes were elongated, glowing a dim, eerie lavender. Marcus froze. He realized that he was not, in fact, alone. The woman pressed a palm to the barrier and stared at him with an intensity that heated his cheeks. She spoke, but the language was an unfamiliar hush and click. Her gaze flicked across his form, padded spacesuit, the sidearm strapped to his thigh, the half-panicked tension in his posture. Even from this distance, he could sense she was evaluating him, as if measuring his significance. A wave of conflicting instincts tore through him. Was she a captive? A guard? Some last survivor? The swirling barrier parted with a whispered hiss. She stepped forward. Hard hammering, Marcus lifted his sidearm but didn't aim it, not yet. After everything he'd seen, he knew better than to trust an unknown alien environment. But he also knew better than to pick a fight when he was so out of his element. She came closer, silver patterns shimmering like living tattoos across her skin. One sign of aggression from her, he'd have to shoot. But she merely lifted her hands slowly, palms out in a near-universal sign of peace. Hesitant, uncertain, he lowered his sidearm just an inch. He couldn't stop staring at the sleek lines of her figure, at the ridges along her cheekbones that were neither scales nor horns, but something in between. Perhaps they served as sensory organs. She said something he didn't comprehend. He felt it thrumming in his chest more than heard it. Carefully, deliberately, she pressed a single fingertip to the star-shaped patch on his chest, his old salvage squad insignia. Marcus took a step back. You're real? He muttered in a half-laugh, half-nervous exhale, forgetting she wouldn't understand. She tilted her head, brow furrowed, as if to say, "Of course I'm real." She pointed to a glowing console by the wall, then to him, then to the console again. The message was plain. Come with me. Heart pounding, he considered the possibility that she might be leading him into a trap. But he had no illusions about his chances if he turned and tried to go back the way he came. She had the advantage of knowing this station, this floating tomb, better than he did. If he ran, there were 1,000 places for her to corner him. Yet something in her eyes spoke of curiosity, not hostility. She extended a hand, a question in her posture. After a long pause, he took it. Her skin was warm, surprisingly so, with a faint electric tingle. Immediately, he felt that electric hum in his bones intensify. The dais in the center of the chamber flickered. Liquid light rippled across the floor in meandering lines, forming patterns that led the way to a narrow archway behind the console. She walked ahead of him with a feline grace, her form draped in what looked like a living mesh of technology, neither clothing nor purely organic. Each step left footprints of light that faded after a heartbeat. The path led into a labyrinth of smaller chambers, each containing bizarre alien machines. Some glimmered with capsules of what might have been water or some unknown fluid. Others contained half-disassembled drones that seemed arthropodal in design. Marcus was reminded of a spider's nest, intricate and unsettling. But she moved without hesitation, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to ensure he followed. He still remembered the last time he trusted someone he hardly knew. It was on Deveron. He and his salvage partner, Elena, had broken into the sealed cargo hold of a crash-landed vessel rumored to be carrying advanced biotech. They'd found contraband, and that find had triggered a chain reaction involving corporate mercenaries, an explosion, and a betrayal he barely survived. Elena, he couldn't think of her now. That memory hurt too much. Maybe that was why he followed this strange alien so readily. Maybe he was hungry for some kind of second chance. Or maybe he just couldn't stand the lonely echoes of this place without a companion, no matter how alien. They arrived at a small chamber lined with consoles and glowing data crystals. She tapped at some floating display with her elongated fingers, ushering him to a second console that flickered to life. The symbols morphing across its surface seemed to respond to her presence. Her voice resonated. Ekenthel. Vierin? She paused, scanning his features for comprehension. The station recognized his exhaled carbon dioxide or some element of his neural patterns. The console beeped, and a swirl of text, some alien, some warped English, began to scroll. An artificial voice stuttered through the room. Language assimilation, incomplete, incomplete. Marcus's eyebrows rose. The station was trying to translate. A hissing series of clicks came from the alien woman, and the console responded. He gleaned words in the mix. Study, biological, communication. He ventured. You want to understand my species? At the same time, the console spat out more partial translations. Study of your form, recognition, synergy, experiment. She gave him an almost predatory smile that ignited something in his chest, a cautious but undeniable spark of anticipation. She was clearly intelligent, maybe a scientist or caretaker. Her eyes flicked to the side, as if scanning him from head to toe. He felt exposed in a way he didn't like but also couldn't resist. There was an intensity to her gaze that stoked his own curiosity, and something else, something deeper that made his stomach tighten. He reminded himself to keep his guard up, but his heart hammered at the notion that he was about to engage with a life form unlike any he'd known. The final translation line blinked up at them both. We must survive together, or not at all. A chill ran up his spine. He wondered if that was a threat or a warning. They spent hours in that chamber, gradually coaxing the console to build a workable dictionary. He learned that her name, translated loosely, was Syrah. He guessed the name was only a fraction of some longer string of concepts, because the console coughed up phrases like Syrah of bloodline sundered, or Syrah of lost luminescence, which was intriguing and a little heartbreaking. She gleaned that he was Marcus, that he was a scavenger in search of salvage. Small bits of the station's function came to light, and with it, a simple but alarming truth: most systems were failing. Life support would run out soon. There was mention of an external threat, some unstoppable tide of cosmic radiation or a band of predatory warships. The details were unclear, but the dire tone was not. Another hour of halting attempts at conversation told him the station was a research outpost, half laboratory, half temple. Its caretaker, Syrah, had awakened from some kind of stasis. He surmised that she was alone. No mention of a crew. Possibly all dead or gone. She was stuck here, and so was he. The station was adrift, systems on the brink, external threats looming. By the time exhaustion overcame him, it was painfully obvious that their only hope lay in joining forces. She seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. They moved to a quiet side chamber, a place more akin to living quarters, with a small bunk and a half-broken overhead lamp that occasionally flickered green. The tight space forced them close. He was a bit uncomfortable. Her presence was magnetic, not just physically, but the air itself seemed to spark with tension when she drew near. At one point, she reached out to touch a tear in his suit, and he caught his breath at the warmth of her fingertips. She whispered something in her language, a question, from the tilt of her voice. He had no translator. All he could do was watch the shift in her expression. Her brows drew together in concern. She was studying him like a puzzle. The overhead lamp flickered again, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat. When light returned, Syrah was closer than before, her tall figure radiating warmth that made him dizzy. He realized she wanted to see his species up close, to understand him more than just physically. She was searching for something emotional, intangible. He wondered if that was part of her culture. She reminded him of a predator carefully circling new prey, yet there was empathy beneath that predatory edge. She finally stepped back, gave him space, and pointed to the bunk. She pantomimed sleeping, then pointed to him. He let out a small laugh, still half tense, half amused at her straightforwardness. "Yeah, I could use some sleep," he murmured. Her face remained inscrutable as he settled onto the bunk, the mattress cold and threadbare. He propped his bag under his head. That was his makeshift pillow. She hovered near the door, then nodded slowly as he closed his eyes. The last thing he saw was her silhouette outlined by the flickering lamp, watching him in silent study. He woke to the sensation of Syrah's voice echoing in the corridor outside. He heard the low hum of the station's power cycling. Groaning, he stood, joints protesting after a night on that hard bunk. When he stepped into the corridor, he found Syrah leaning over a console, bathed in the lavender glow of a flickering overhead panel. The swirling text across the screen had made more progress in bridging their languages. A mechanical voice, stilted but clearer now, provided an approximate translation. "We must fix station power, or we die." The final words resonated ominously. Syrah turned to him, her expression calm yet urgent. She indicated a holomap on the console that displayed the labyrinth of corridors, decks, and sealed chambers. Some sections were sealed off behind heavy blast doors. Another large area was damaged by what looked like an impact crater. Possibly the station had been hit by a meteor or debris from a space battle. The entire starboard side was a mangled skeleton. With a sigh, Marcus scanned the map. He was no certified mechanic, but he had decent salvage experience, enough to rewire a broken console. Maybe he could help. They set off together. She led the way, moving with the silent confidence of someone intimately familiar with these corridors. Yet he noticed occasional hesitation, as if some areas were new to her. Perhaps her memory was incomplete, or she'd never expected to navigate the station alone. He tried not to stare at the graceful lines of her body, the subtle glow that accompanied her like an aura. Instead, he studied the environment, the twisted metal supports overhead, the glacial drip of condensation from a burst coolant pipe. The entire station seemed on the verge of collapse. Rust dotted the edges of sealed doors, and flickering lights cast ephemeral patterns on the bulkheads. The air was frigid, carrying faint hints of something tangy, like ozone or alien incense. They arrived at a large circular hatch. Sarah placed her palm on a biometrically keyed panel. It scanned her, then hissed open. Beyond lay a dim chamber dominated by an enormous cylindrical reactor. Pale arcs of electricity danced along coils that rose from the floor to the ceiling. Panels flickered, and a large display showed dangerously low energy reserves. Marcus whistled in amazement. If they could get this reactor stable, they might buy themselves more time. Sarah turned expectantly to him. He knelt before the control console, tools from his salvage kit rattling. As he worked, he felt her presence at his back, watchful and intense. She was studying his every movement, his hands connecting cables, bridging circuits, rerouting power lines. Occasionally, he'd glance up at the display to see if the readings improved. But it was like patching a bullet wound with duct tape. The best he could hope for was short-term stability. With a click and a spark that nearly singed his eyebrows, the console regained partial functionality. Monitors around them lit up. Sarah made a sound that might have been approval or excitement. Then he heard a distant rumble like thunder. The power surge must have activated something. Lights flicked on across the station. A battered voice over the intercom repeated warnings in an alien dialect. Sarah stiffened at the message, her expression turning grim. Marcus glanced at the flickering translator display, which produced a jagged line of text. External hazard, seek shield protection. She pointed to the map, to a location near the top of the station. A shield generator or some protective device might be their only defense against cosmic radiation or some external threat. Without it, the station's newly reactivated systems would only accelerate their doom by drawing attention or letting radiation flood the corridors. Right, he muttered, adrenaline quickening. Together, they hurried to the lifts, hoping the partial power would let them ascend. The small lift compartment shuddered but rose slowly, carrying them toward a deck ironically labeled in alien glyphs that might have read, Observatory. They emerged into a wide, domed chamber that overlooked the star-smeared void. There, behind a thick viewport of tinted glass, the swirl of cosmic dust glistened like a silent storm. The station's orbit carried it through a field of swirling debris and radiation arcs that glowed faintly green and purple. The effect was mesmerizing, but the warnings on the consoles indicated high hazard levels. Sarah approached a massive ring-shaped device that jutted from the floor. Components hissed and clicked in protest. She touched a series of panels that lit up under her fingertips. Marcus hopped onto a scaffold to examine the mechanism from above. It reminded him of a shield projector, the kind used by advanced civilizations to repel cosmic forces. But it was only partially online. He could see blackened circuit boards, melted junctions. A swirl of tension pulled at his gut. Time was short. If a radiation wave hit, they'd be roasted or mutated. The scoreboard for survival looked grim. He rummaged through his salvage bag, pulling out anything that might serve as a temporary fix. Sarah, nimble and fearless, climbed up next to him, her eyes scanning the twisted cables. Her expression was sharp with determination. He realized they were breathing in near unison, hearts pounding as they scrambled to reconfigure the device. She gestured at a part, he'd hand her the correct tool, they'd cross wires, bridging the gaps. He felt the warmth of her presence, the surge of energy that came from working together against impossible odds. Occasionally their gazes met, and in that shared look was something unspoken, a flicker of trust that neither quite acknowledged yet. A sudden jolt rattled the station. A computer voice barked an alarm. Marcus grabbed a support beam to keep from falling. Outside, the swirling debris was intensifying. Sarah quickly slammed her palm onto a control panel, and a hum reverberated through the entire chamber. The ring-shaped device glowed. Power lines sizzled. The dome darkened, shield shutters sliding over the viewport. The hum rose to a deafening pitch. Light flared around them, washing the chamber in pale violet. For a moment, Marcus feared the station would tear itself apart. Then, with a final burst, everything stabilized. The ring generator sank into a low-frequency hum. Status lights flickered from red to yellow, then to a cautious green. Marcus exhaled, tension draining from his limbs. They'd done it, at least for now. Exhausted, they slumped against the console. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving him shaky but alive. He met Sarah's gaze. Her eyes were shining with that uncanny luminescence, and for a moment, the weight of everything else fell away. They were just two survivors in the darkness, sharing a moment of raw relief. She raised a slender hand and gently brushed the back of his head, a brief gesture that made his heart stutter. The warmth of her touch lingered like a slow ember. He wasn't sure what to do or say, so he managed a crooked half-smile. She took a breath and gestured that they should return to safer parts of the station. He nodded. Together they made their way back to the heart of this labyrinth, uncertain of what new dangers awaited, but for the first time, feeling a spark of companionship. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exploring the invisible thread weaving them closer, no matter how impossible it might be. Marcus found himself poring over a half-broken translator console in a small chamber that flickered with sterile overhead lights. Days, he wasn't sure exactly how many, had passed since he stumbled upon the station. His concept of time was confused, punctuated by frantic repairs and wary sleep. Yet, in those days, he'd fallen into a delicate rhythm with Sarah. They scavenged compartments for supplies, rerouted failing power couplings, checked on any external threats. But there was more. Something intangible, a growing bond. He felt it when she'd stand behind him, watching him type, that silent scrutiny tinged with genuine curiosity. Or when she'd place her hand lightly on his shoulder after a near disaster in the corridors. He felt the electricity of her presence more acutely than he'd like to admit. And sometimes, during the quiet moments, they'd attempt conversation through the evolving translation software. Now, he typed, "My species is called human. We come from Earth." Sarah studied the text. The console beeped, providing an alien approximation. She read it, then responded in her halting, melodic clicks. The software tried to parse it. "Your clan, your Earth is far from here. Condition unknown." He sighed. She was essentially telling him that Earth might be unreachable, or non-existent from this station's vantage. That was hardly news. He'd known he was on the far side of the galaxy, trapped by an engine malfunction in his salvage ship. Her expression softened. She typed something else, resulting in, "Have you bond partners?" He blinked, taken aback by the abrupt personal question. Bond partners. Presumably meant significant others or family. He typed, "No. I had a partner, lost her. She's gone." The translator displayed the message, but the nuances of heartbreak and guilt might not have come through. Sarah's eyes flickered. She regarded him with compassion, then typed a question that the translator fumbled. Something about blood memory, or longing. A pang squeezed his chest. He guessed she was asking if he carried a burden. He didn't want to talk about Elena's betrayal or the heartbreak that followed. Instead, he just nodded and left it at that. Despite the station's gloom, they found small moments of respite. After a supply run through a frozen corridor, they stumbled on what might have been a mess hall. Most of the rations were decayed or unrecognizable. But Sarah found a sealed crate. Inside were nutrient bars with alien text on them, but they still seemed edible enough. She offered one to Marcus, carefully demonstrating how to open the wrapper. He bit into it, half expecting a horrific taste. Instead, it was sweet, like dried fruit, with a faint metallic aftertaste. He made a face. She laughed, the first real laughter he'd heard from her. It sounded breathy and low, dancing on the edges of sincerity and surprise, like she wasn't accustomed to laughter herself. Something about hearing it eased the tension in his chest. They sat there, sharing the rest of the bars and battered canisters of water. Sarah stared at him as he ate, a curious tilt to her head. Then she touched the side of his jaw, trailing her fingers over his stubble. The translator was off, so there were no words. Just a gentle exploration of differences. He tried not to flinch, controlling the urge to shift away. Her touch was mesmerizing, a combination of scientific observation and something else. She leaned in, close enough that he could see a subtle pattern of ridges along her neck, glowing faintly. He felt heat flood his cheeks. Her lips parted slightly, revealing canines that were delicately pointed. But there was no threat in her posture, only curiosity. He swallowed. "What are you doing?" he whispered, knowing she couldn't understand the words. She just brushed his jawline once more, then withdrew, as if concluding her study. They fell into that kind of push-and-pull dance. In the following shifts of time, as they labored to keep the station's system stable, the bond between them deepened. She'd guide him through the labyrinth of hallways, touching his elbow to steer him in the right direction. Sometimes he'd catch her watching him from across a chamber, her eyes luminous with an emotion he couldn't name. And at night, if day or night meant anything here, they returned to the cramped quarters they'd designated for rest. He took the bunk, she often perched on the edge or paced around, lost in her thoughts. Once, when he stirred awake, he found her crouched at his side, peering at his sleeping form. He almost yelped in surprise, which made her jerk back, apologetic. She pointed to her eyes and then to him, indicating she was studying. A strange flush of warmth filled him. She wanted to know him, his species, his vulnerabilities. The memory of Elena's betrayal still haunted him, but he couldn't deny the part of him that yearned for connection. One evening, or maybe it was day, he awoke to find Sarah rummaging through a storage locker. She withdrew a large blanket-like material, woven with metallic threads that shimmered in dull blues and silvers. He propped himself up on one elbow. She approached him with the blanket folded in her arms, an inquisitive gleam in her eyes. Setting it down, she switched on a small handheld device, a flashlight, by the look of it, though of alien design. A concentrated beam of white light emerged, bright enough to illuminate the bunk. She motioned for him to move aside, then crawled in next to him, a bold act that made his heart race. She kept a careful distance at first, unveiling the flashlight to show him. He realized it was part translator and part scanning tool. The beam seemed to project hidden text or images on the blanket's metallic weave. She said something in her language. The translator beeped from its resting spot across the room but couldn't catch enough audio. Undeterred, she flicked the light off, then on again, leaning in to whisper a string of syllables near his ear. It was as if she expected him to repeat them. He tried, but butchered the alien vowels. She chuckled softly, a throaty sound that made his stomach flutter. Together, under that blanket, they passed the flashlight back and forth, shining it at each other's faces, hands, arms, like children sharing ghost stories around a campfire. But for them, it was about bridging a gap in species and culture. She traced her name on the blanket with the beam, shimmering patterns forming fleeting glyphs. He wrote his name in the blank space, Marcus. She tried repeating it, but her accent elongated the vowels in a lyrical way. They burst into quiet laughter, muffled by the claustrophobic metal walls. In that moment, they weren't so different, just two lonely beings forging a connection where none should exist. Hours seemed to slip by in that hush of intimacy, their voices hushed, their hearts pounding with the closeness. Eventually, she rested her head against the bunk's edge, eyes fluttering with exhaustion. Marcus coaxed her to lie down, at least for a moment's respite. The blanket cast faint silver light across her face. He found himself captivated by the shape of her features, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, the mesmerizing patterns that glowed beneath her skin like shifting constellations. She opened her eyes once and stared at him through half-lowered lids, an emotion swirling in those violet depths that could only be described as longing. A breath caught in his throat. Before he could speak, though what words he would say, he didn't know, she drifted to sleep. He lay there, consciousness buzzing with unspoken realizations. The boundaries between them were dissolving, replaced by a tapestry of quiet understanding. He told himself it was madness. He was a battered, untrusting human, haunted by betrayal and sorrow. She was an alien caretaker or scientist, stranded as the last of her people. But for all that, the connection was real, forging itself in the hush of near darkness and whispered attempts at speech. He closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, a flicker of hope kindled in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, this bond would heal more than just his immediate survival needs. And if the station was their shared prison, it might also become the cradle of something transcendent. The next cycle began with an alarm that blared through the corridors, shrill and grating. Marcus jolted awake, nearly rolling off the bunk. Sarah shot up too, eyes wide. They scrambled to the door, yanking it open to face flickering red lights. The station's central computer was screaming warnings, an intruder or some external breach. Fear clenched his gut. He followed Sarah to the corridor, where they half ran to the nearest console. The translator software stuttered out random phrases. Life forms detected, docking in progress, weapons possible. Marcus felt a cold sweat break out along his neck. Pirates? Corporate mercenaries? Another species? He shot a look at Sarah, whose face was taut with worry. She input commands with lightning speed. A screen displayed the docking port on the station's exterior. Something large had attached itself, perhaps a salvage craft or raiding vessel. They both knew what that meant: trouble. Gearing up, Marcus retrieved a battered pulse pistol and a crowbar from his salvage kit. Sarah donned a set of alien bracers that hummed with faint energy fields. Together, they crept through corridors that hissed with steam from leaking pipes. The docking bay was located near the lower decks, an area they had barely explored due to structural damage. Along the way, they heard metallic clangs, the echo of boots on metal. Tension coiled in Marcus's chest. He was prepared to fight. He wouldn't let them hurt Sarah, or himself, without a battle. The corridor opened into a wide chamber that might have been a cargo hold, with towering crates half collapsed. A faint glow from Sarah's bracers illuminated the gloom, revealing shapes moving beyond the stacked crates. Marcus motioned for her to stay back while he peered around the corner. At first glance, the intruders looked human. They wore mismatched armor and carried lethal-looking rifles. Their voices were muffled by helmets. He counted 3, maybe 4. They were investigating the crates with the casual brutality of seasoned raiders. One of them barked an order, smashing open a container to rummage through its contents. Marcus cursed under his breath. He'd faced mercenaries like this before, desperate men, or worse, well-paid men with no moral scruples. He glanced at Sarah, who looked ready to defend her station with lethal force if necessary. Could they handle 4 armed intruders? Especially with her limited knowledge of human tactics, and him lacking a functional suit of armor? The odds didn't look good. But neither was retreating an option. This station was their lifeline. He whispered a quick plan. He'd create a distraction, draw them down a side corridor. Sarah could slip behind them, use her bracers, whatever they did, to take them by surprise. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Taking a breath, Marcus ran a hand over his face. Memories of betrayal and violence roared to life, but he crushed them down. He needed to focus. He ducked low, moving between the crates until he was within earshot of the men. Then he tossed a metal component across the room, letting it clang loudly on the floor. The intruders spun toward the noise. "Who's there?" one snarled. Another flicked on a helmet light, sweeping the area. Marcus fired a single pulse blast, hitting a nearby pipe. Steam erupted. The men shouted in alarm. He sprinted back into the corridor. As expected, they gave chase, boots pounding behind him. He dashed around a corner, heart racing, uncertain if Sarah was in position. The men rounded the corner after him, rifles raised. One barked, "Stop right there!" Marcus turned, pistol raised, but behind the men, the corridor lights flickered. He glimpsed Sarah stepping from the shadows. A surge of shimmering energy crackled from her bracers, forming a wave of crackling violet that slammed into the intruders. They yelled, dropping to their knees as the energy ripped the guns from their hands. Marcus lunged forward, delivering a hard blow with the crowbar to the nearest intruder's head, knocking him unconscious. Syrah executed a fluid motion that sent a second intruder sprawling against the wall. The third tried to turn his rifle, but it jammed again. Marcus yanked it free and clocked him in the jaw. He fell, unconscious or dazed. The steam still hissed around them, making the scene surreal. Syrah advanced on the last intruder, who was struggling to rise. A savage glint burned in her eyes. She raised a bracer, energy crackling. Marcus, chest heaving, put a hand on her arm. "Wait," he said, though she might not fully grasp the word. "He's down." She glared at the intruder, then relented, the energy dissipating. They bound the men's wrists with cable from Marcus's salvage kit and dragged them to an empty cargo hold. While Marcus did a quick search, he discovered they were indeed mercenaries, though from where, he couldn't say. They carried insignia he didn't recognize. They had minimal supplies but lethal gear. What drew them here? Perhaps the faint signals from the reactivated station. A few of them groaned, consciousness returning. He found himself trembling with residual adrenaline. If this had happened a year ago, he might have hesitated to risk his life for a stranger. But now, with Syrah at his side, everything had changed. Their survival was entwined. He realized how fiercely he wanted to protect that. They questioned the mercenaries, though questioned was a strong word. Communication was complicated. Syrah's translator recognized only a fraction of their dialect. Between garbled curses, Marcus pieced together that these men were part of a bigger crew. They had come searching for salvage and any salvageable alien tech. They bragged about how more of their people might join soon. Syrah's eyes flashed with fear and anger. Marcus shared the sentiment. If more came, they could be overrun. The station was a treasure trove to these vultures. For Marcus, it was also the fragile bubble keeping him and Syrah alive. He could feel the tension building in Syrah, the primal urge to defend her home. He told the mercenaries to get out while they could, but they spat curses. One of them sneered something about selling that alien creature for a fortune. Marcus's fists clenched. Syrah might not have understood the words, but she caught the tone. She seized the man's collar, an alien hiss escaping her lips that sent a chill through Marcus. Slowly, she released him, turning to Marcus as if asking for his counsel. They agreed, somehow, without words, that they had to seal off the docking port or jettison these intruders. They couldn't risk an entire squad boarding. They made it to the docking clamp controls and found the mercenary vessel latched to the station. The console's interface was ancient, glitching. But Syrah's knowledge of the station's systems combined with Marcus's knack for mechanical improvisation gave them a chance. While they worked, the mercenaries stirred behind them, still bound. One spat out vile threats. Another tried to wriggle free. Syrah shot him a look that froze him in place. With a final command input, the docking clamps released. A warning klaxon blared. Through a small viewport, Marcus glimpsed the mercenaries' ship drifting away, powerless to reconnect. They'd be forced to send out a distress signal or try manual retrieval, but they wouldn't be able to board again easily. In that moment, relief flooded Marcus. But their predicament was far from over. They had 4 live mercenaries on board, battered but dangerous if unguarded. They couldn't kill them in cold blood, not unless forced. They'd have to figure out what to do. Syrah stared at Marcus, an unspoken question in her eyes. Are we safe? He shook his head. Not yet. Uncertain how to proceed, they left the mercenaries locked in a sealed portion of the station with minimal supplies. Possibly not merciful, but it kept them contained. The translator's final attempt at dialogue gleaned that the main mercenary ship might try to come for them. A sense of doom overshadowed the victory. Marcus felt an icy knot in his stomach. The station was in no shape for extended conflict. They needed a plan. Syrah turned to him, her expression resolute. She clasped his hand in hers. He felt that electric warmth again. Through the translator, she managed a ragged sentence. We fight, or we leave. Her eyes bored into his. Could they leave? Was there a functional ship hidden somewhere? Or some emergency escape vessel? She nodded, as if reading his thoughts. They might have one chance at flight. Side by side, they retreated from the cargo bay, pulses still racing. The sense of fear, the desperate edge of survival, had only intensified the closeness between them. He was keenly aware of her presence, the brush of her skin against his arm as they hurried through the corridors. Another standoff with mercenaries might be inevitable. Yet, in the tangle of it all, his mind latched onto a single realization: if he was going to risk everything for someone, he wanted it to be Syrah. The station's shadows flickered as they passed. He recalled her confident stance, that flash of protectiveness in her eyes, and recognized a reflection of his own. They were both wounded souls, but together, they were forging something unstoppable, even if it was also terrifying. He squeezed her hand gently, and she squeezed back, forging a silent pact in the midst of chaos. They pressed onward, uncertain but united, determined to find a pathway that led not just to survival, but to a deeper bond blossoming between two creatures who, against all odds, found each other in the dark. Time blurred into a patchwork of frantic repairs, hushed strategizing, and stolen moments of closeness that left Marcus's heart pounding. The mercenaries remained a simmering threat. Occasionally, they'd hear distant banging on locked doors or curses echoing through the ventilation shafts. But Syrah had sealed the corridors, restricting them to a quarantine zone. For now, at least, the mercenaries were contained. Meanwhile, she guided Marcus to a part of the station he'd never seen, a sprawling bay filled with half-finished crafts. Some were small pods, barely more than single-seat vehicles. Others were advanced but clearly incomplete. She led him to a sleek vessel perched at the bay's edge, almost hidden by tarps. Its design took his breath away, smooth, organic contours reminiscent of a living creature, alien script etched along the hull. When Syrah activated it, faint lines of light traced the craft's surface in a mesmerizing dance. She explained, with gestures and partial translations, that it was an experimental ship designed for short-range exploration. It had partial stealth capabilities, but lacked a hyperdrive. At best, it could carry them to the nearest jump gate or allied station. That might be enough to escape the mercenaries. Marcus ran a hand along the craft's hull, feeling the faint hum of dormant power. His mind churned with logistics. The craft was damaged, lacking certain components. They'd need to salvage parts from the rest of the station or from the mercenaries' gear if they wanted to get it flight-ready. As they pored over the craft's interior, he realized it had unique controls, almost neural in design. Organic filaments spiraled from the pilot's seat. Syrah placed her palm on a console, and it lit up, scanning her. A wave of violet luminescence passed over her body. She winced, pulling her hand away. Something was off. The ship recognized her but seemed to reject her current state. She muttered a string of alien syllables that the translator approximated as "Neurolink, incomplete, requires synergy." She looked pointedly at Marcus, then at the seat. A prickling sensation crawled up his spine. Was she implying they both had to form a neurobond to pilot this thing? The notion unsettled him. But if it was their only way out? They returned to the living quarters that cycle, burdened by new dilemmas. Syrah paced, occasionally typing into the portable translator. Marcus sat on the bunk, mind reeling. They had to figure out how to unify their neural patterns? That sounded like a recipe for madness. Even the idea of letting someone, an alien, into his mind triggered old scars of mistrust. Yet the alternative was remaining in a station that was slowly dying, with mercenaries waiting to pounce. Finally, Syrah approached him, the translator in hand. A halting monotone voice said, "My kind bond minds for flight. Ship is living. It merges with pilot. We must unify, or we cannot escape." Marcus rubbed his temples. "Merges how?" She typed again. "Biological link. Emotional link." That last phrase tightened something in his chest. Emotional link? The translator churned more words. Need trust. Need surrender. He looked at her unsettled. This was bigger than just flipping a switch. This was letting someone into the darkest corners of his psyche, someone he was growing to care for, yes, but also someone he hardly knew. Then again, wasn't that true of all intimacy? Maybe the alien technology simply forced an honesty he'd been avoiding his whole life. He nodded slowly. Sarah exhaled in relief. She knelt down in front of him, reaching for his hands. Her touch was warm, sending a jolt through his pulse. Then, turning his palms upward, she brought them to her temples, letting him feel the subtle ridges there. Her eyes fluttered shut. He sensed she was trying to show him something. A faint tingle danced along his fingertips. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a soft luminescence. In that second, he felt a flicker of presence in his mind, like a whisper that wasn't his own voice. Startled, he withdrew his hands. Sarah inhaled sharply, letting her arms fall. The unspoken tension between them was immense. They both knew that forging this neural connection was not a casual act. It was an act of deep trust, vulnerability, and if the rumors about alien bonding were true, a form of intimacy that transcended physical boundaries. Days passed as they prepared. They scavenged the station for missing components to repair the small craft. In between, Sarah guided him through rudimentary exercises in connecting minds. It was akin to meditation, but with the possibility that one's mental walls might come crashing down. At first, Marcus resisted, fear and old trauma twisting inside him. He recalled Elena's betrayal. What if Sarah saw all of that? What if she witnessed how unworthy he felt, how desperately he'd once clung to a person who ended up leaving him for dead? Each time he pulled away, Sarah's expression softened with understanding. She never forced him, she merely waited for him to decide. And each time, he came back, drawn by a longing stronger than his fear. Slowly, they established small flickers of telepathic alignment. He could sense her surface emotions, curiosity, regret, sorrow, a deep well of loneliness. She, in turn, sensed the roiling conflict within him. Over and over, she pressed a comforting palm against his chest, as though reminding him that she was not Elena, that she wouldn't betray him. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Between training sessions, they found moments of subdued humor. Sarah discovered that if she touched a certain patch on his suit, it would crackle with static electricity, jolting him slightly. She did it a few times, feigning ignorance, then giggled at his startled yelps. He retaliated by showing her an earth gesture for "no," wagging his finger. She caught on quickly, mimicking his expression with an exaggerated scowl until they both burst into laughter. That laughter felt cathartic, a testament that even in dire straits, they could share something light-hearted. And in the dim corridors, sometimes Sarah would nudge him in a playful manner or share a half-smile that made his heart skip. He was learning that beneath her regal bearing and fierce protectiveness lay a gentle soul that had been deprived of companionship for too long. Then came the evening that changed everything. They were in the living quarters, exhausted from installing a critical stabilizer in the craft's engine. The station's lighting was dim, verging on darkness, as if the power grids were sighing with fatigue. Sarah stood near a console, her tall frame bathed in the faint glow of a single overhead strip. She turned to face him, eyes reflecting the station's sorrow. Reaching out, she brushed a thumb over the scar on his nose. The translator was off, so no words bridged the gap. But none were needed. In the hush that followed, Marcus felt every fiber of his being tilt toward her. Her gaze flicked to his lips, then back to his eyes. A tremor coursed through him. Slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance, resting his hands on her hips, unsure if she'd accept. She did. Their breath mingled, hearts pounding in unison. When their lips finally met, it was a soft, fragile joining, tentative at first. The ridges near her cheekbones tingled beneath his palms. She gave a soft, vibrating hum that reverberated in his chest. Heat flared between them as they found a rhythm. She tasted of some alien spice, a faint tang that only heightened his awareness of how different, how new, this was. Yet it felt strangely natural. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, pressing her body close, and he reciprocated, letting the tension and longing that had built all these days spill forth. He pulled back briefly, looking into her eyes, searching for any hint of doubt. But she gazed at him with raw vulnerability and longing. They locked lips again, deeper this time, a shared gasp bridging the space. Old wounds fluttered in the back of his mind, but they no longer bound him. This was real, immediate. They were forging a connection that might be fleeting or might last forever. Only time would tell. Every brush of lips, every soft moan, told him that this was more than lust. It was about survival, trust, and the fragile hope that two broken souls could fit together. Eventually, they broke apart, breathing heavily, still tangled in each other's arms. Marcus stroked her face gently. She responded by resting her forehead against his. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him. For a while, they simply held each other, letting the hum of the station and the faint rasp of air circulation fill the silence. He marveled at how strange and beautiful this was, a fragile pocket of warmth amidst the decaying world. A surge of gratitude welled up inside him for having found someone who understood, who fought beside him, who touched him in ways more profound than skin. Outside, corridors flickered. The mercenaries still lurked. The station's systems were at risk. But in that moment, all of it receded. In the circle of Syrah's arms, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the promise of acceptance. He swallowed hard, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. She inhaled softly, her voice trembling in her own language, likely an expression of comfort or longing. He didn't need the translator to know that they had crossed a threshold. The desire to protect this bond was stronger than any fear. No matter what came next, they would face it as one. The following cycles were a whirlwind of planning and emotional undercurrents. With the bond between them growing, both physically and mentally, they redoubled their efforts to get the living ship operational. The Neuralink sessions became more frequent and intense. Often, Syrah would guide Marcus through sequences of breathing and concentration, pressing her forehead or the ridged sides of her head to his. Their shared awareness grew more tangible each time, allowing glimpses of each other's memories. They were fleeting impressions. He caught flashes of her life before the station, a sense of open vistas under twin suns, the laughter of others like her. He saw sorrow too, a half-formed memory of her kneeling among broken pillars, an expression of heartbreak etched on her face. She saw glimpses of his betrayals, his near-death in the salvage fiasco, and how he'd woken up alone in the drifting wreck, abandoned by the person he trusted most. Tears came unbidden, shared between them, forging a deeper empathy. There were awkward moments of comedic confusion too, like the time she stumbled upon his mental image of a hamburger, or the memory of him stubbing his toe and unleashing a volley of earth curses. Through it all, she showed fascination and gentleness, making him realize that despite her imposing exterior, she was just as vulnerable underneath. Amid these sessions, their physical closeness took on an even deeper significance. They'd steal kisses in the half-lit corridors, press their bodies together when the tension of the day threatened to overwhelm them. Once, after a particularly harrowing meltdown in the station's reactor coolant system, they staggered back to the living quarters, clothes damp with condensation. Panting and laughing with relief, they found themselves entangled in a heated embrace that left them both trembling. Marcus discovered that the ridges along her spine and arms were extraordinarily sensitive, eliciting breathy gasps when he traced them gently. In turn, her alien physiology, slender but strong limbs, the subtle patterns shifting along her skin, fascinated him. She would watch his responses with an almost scientific curiosity, then soften into the moment with unmistakable affection. It was a dance of exploration, building trust that wove a cocoon around them. As they approached the final stage of preparing the ship, a crucial step remained, a full neuromerge. Syrah explained, via the translator, that a stable link was necessary to pilot the craft. The ship's biotech would sense if their minds were in sync. If the merge was incomplete or half-hearted, the ship might reject them mid-flight, dooming them. The notion made Marcus's stomach twist. It wasn't just the risk, it was the idea of letting Syrah see everything. No secrets. Could he handle that? Could she? Yet he sensed that her species had done this for generations. It was normal for her, but with him, an alien, there were unknowns. One evening, she led him to a secluded chamber near the ship bay, a place she'd prepared with faint lights flickering overhead. The walls bore intricate alien designs that seemed to shift and glow. In the center of the room lay a circular platform, softly lit. She guided him to kneel opposite her. They were both stripped of armor and heavy clothing, wearing only the minimal layers to keep them warm. The translator was set aside. This had to be done without mechanical crutches. She began a low chant, voice vibrating with an otherworldly resonance. He felt it in his chest, a subtle pulsation that caused the lights to ripple. Her ridges glowed, those strange patterns shimmering across her skin like phosphorescent tattoos. Slowly, she reached out and placed her palms against his temples. Marcus closed his eyes. A swirl of energy coalesced in the space between them. He sensed the shifting tapestry of her consciousness pressing against his, more potent than all their previous attempts. Flashes of color, emotion, memory. Her voice filled his head, though he couldn't decipher words, only the emotional undertones of longing, fear, and hope. Hesitation nearly made him pull back. But he remembered her unwavering support, how she'd fought beside him, how she'd cradled him in quiet moments. He inhaled, deliberately lowering the walls around his heart. What followed was an indescribable rush of sensations. He felt as if he were floating in a boundless sea, gentle waves lapping at his mind. Images of her world, sweeping canyons under a burning sky, a society built on empathic rituals, merged with glimpses of his childhood, a dusty farmland under the earth's sun, the smell of cut grass, a father who rarely smiled. Emotions bled together. Her grief for her lost people blended with his heartbreak over betrayals. In that swirling dance, something new emerged, a sense of belonging, of acceptance that transcended species. Tears slid down his cheeks. He felt her presence as a comforting warmth, urging him deeper. And so he pushed further, letting her see his raw vulnerabilities, his regrets, his fears. In turn, he witnessed her moments of despair, the burden of being the last caretaker. They clung to each other in that psychic realm, forging a bond that crackled with cosmic intensity. When the merge finally lessened in intensity, Marcus found himself gasping, eyes still shut. Sarah's hands were trembling against his temples, her own breath ragged. He could feel her heart beating in time with his, as if they shared a single pulse. Slowly, they opened their eyes. She whispered something he couldn't fully translate, but the tone was unmistakable. Gratitude, relief, awe. He realized he was shaking, his entire body thrumming with leftover energy. Sarah steadied him, pressing her forehead to his in a tender gesture. Though he couldn't read her mind at will, the lingering sense of her presence in his thoughts was comforting, like a gentle hum in the background. They embraced, tears mingling with whispered laughter. He felt both stripped bare and more whole than he ever had before. That night, they returned to the living quarters in a haze of exhaustion. Sarah took his hand, leading him to the bunk without a word. They were beyond translation now. Their bodies said everything. When they laid down, tangling beneath that shimmering blanket, the passion between them unleashed. Every caress was charged with the awareness of the other's soul. There was no longer the awkward barrier of different species. In the hush, he explored her gently, mindful of her ridges and the places where her skin glowed brightest. She responded with soft hisses of pleasure, arching into his touch, trembling as she discovered the responsiveness of his own body. He pressed kisses along the delicate lines of her neck, inhaling her subtle scent, like rain on hot stone and distant flowers. She arched beneath him, eyes half-lidded, a soft murmur escaping her lips. Their breaths mingled in an intimate dance that felt as cosmic as the swirling stars beyond the station walls. In that final moment of surrender, the bond between them flared. He sensed her raw desire, her longing for completion, and she felt his yearning to protect and cherish her. Their bodies and minds melded in a sequence of slow, burning waves that built into something incandescent. He felt himself unraveling in her arms, surrendering all the guilt and pain he'd carried. In return, he offered her acceptance, a promise of a shared future, however uncertain. The final crest came like a supernova, leaving them breathless, entwined, hearts pounding as one. When the tremors subsided, they lay there, skin damp, souls twined in a closeness that defied words. Outside, the station's lights flickered, as if acknowledging the union within. With a trembling hand, he brushed her hair-like filaments aside, pressing a final, tender kiss to her lips. She murmured something in that melodic language, accompanied by a wave of reassuring warmth in his mind. He responded with a contented sigh, pulling her close until their bodies fit together like puzzle pieces. In that moment, the station didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like the place where they transcended loneliness. And though danger still lurked, they met it wrapped in each other's arms, bound by an intimacy that was both terrifying and profoundly beautiful. Come dawn, if that concept had any meaning here, they returned to the small living ship. Marcus felt different, lighter. The neural link had changed him, making him attuned to Sarah's emotions in ways that defied logic. He still had his own thoughts and free will, but he sensed her presence like a comforting resonance. She approached the vessel's pilot chamber, placing her palm on the organic console. This time, the craft's filaments lit up in a swirl of violet, spreading across the hull in a radiant pattern. He placed his own hand beside hers, heart thumping. A cascade of energy recognized him too. With quiet awe, he watched as the ship's interior glowed. Sarah turned to him and nodded, eyes shining. They were accepted. The craft would let them pilot it together. There was still the issue of the mercenaries in containment. They couldn't simply leave them behind, unguarded, able to break free and cause havoc. Sarah typed a suggestion into the translator. Put station in lockdown. Automatic security. They remain trapped until rescue. Marcus considered it. It felt risky, but what choice did they have? They had no moral obligation to free men who would likely kill them if given the chance. With heavy resolve, they sealed the station's doors, rerouted power to keep the mercenaries isolated in a single zone with just enough life support. Let them wait for their own vessel to mount a rescue. By then, Marcus and Sarah would be gone, slipping away. Preparing the ship's final systems took hours. They moved supplies, data crystals, and what little rations they could salvage. Sarah insisted on bringing along a container of her species' memory archives. Marcus, curious, glimpsed images flickering across the surface, shadows of an entire civilization. It struck him how massive the risk was for her to trust him in carrying these intangible treasures. She was entrusting him with her people's legacy. At last, the craft was fueled, as best as they could manage. They stood on the docking bay's threshold, scanning for any sign of last-minute sabotage from the mercenaries. The corridors were silent, no echo of curses or banging. Maybe the men had worn themselves out. Marcus inhaled, glancing at Sarah. A subtle wave of emotion from her told him she was ready. They entered the vessel. The cockpit was small, designed for one pilot, but Sarah adjusted a cradle-like seat so Marcus could sit behind her, arms around her waist, both in reach of the neural interface. He settled in, the seat's organic padding molding to his body. A tingle rippled through him when the filaments brushed his arms. Sarah powered up the craft with a sequence of gestures, and a hum of life spread through the hull. Her ridges glowed softly, responding to the ship's signals. He felt the swirl of excitement and trepidation in her mind, echoing his own. The bay doors creaked open, revealing the star-strewn void beyond. The cosmic dust storm still churned, but the station's shield generator gave them a window to depart. Sarah engaged thrusters. Slowly, gracefully, the craft lifted off the bay floor, drifting forward into the darkness. Marcus felt weightless, a mixture of fear and exhilaration flooding him. They cleared the station's hull. A final glimpse of the battered metal skeleton drifted beneath them. The hiss of the craft's engines deepened. Sarah adjusted controls, and the vessel angled away, heading toward open space. Marcus swallowed hard, half expecting a mercenary ship to appear, guns blazing. But the void remained silent. When they reached a safe distance, Sarah triggered a stealth field. The console lights dimmed, shifting to a subdued glow. Their craft, shaped like a silver crescent, vanished against the stars. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a glimmer of optimism. They were free, though not entirely safe. The galaxy stretched out before them, unknown and perilous. But at least they had a chance. With Sarah's knowledge of local star routes, they could search for a friendly port or a jump gate. Perhaps find a place to call home, or build one together. Hours into the flight, the tension eased. Marcus leaned his head against Sarah's shoulder, wrapping an arm protectively around her waist. The cockpit was quiet save for the soft hum of life support. He felt her presence in his mind, a faint reassurance. She turned to look at him, eyes filled with a quiet joy. He brushed a kiss across the ridges of her cheek. A wave of warmth passed through him, and she returned a contented sigh. The bond was no longer just an abstract concept, it was a living current that pulsed between them. He recalled how improbable it all was, a human scavenger drifting through space, colliding with the last caretaker of a lost station. And now they were entwined in body and mind, forging a shared destiny. Maybe fate wasn't just something that happened to you. Maybe you helped create it. They navigated around pockets of debris, occasionally spotting the silhouette of a distant warship or derelict floating in the cosmic gloom. Anxiety flickered each time, but none approached. Sarah charted a route toward a rumored corridor of safe travel. She explained, through a quiet mental nudge, that if they could reach a certain star system, they might find old allies of her species or at least a functional jump gate. Marcus asked if she truly believed her people were out there. He felt her uncertainty, the ache of loneliness. But he also felt hope. If any of her kin survived, they might welcome her, and him, if he proved himself. He vowed silently that he would do whatever it took. She tightened her grip on the controls, reaffirming that vow with a determined set to her jaw. They dozed in shifts, drifting in the blackness. At one point, Marcus startled awake from a half-remembered nightmare of betrayal. He felt Sarah's hand clasp his, sending gentle reassurance. The bond muted his fear. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering, "I'm here," even though the translator was offline. She understood. The quiet intimacy calmed him. In that hush, he thought about the future. Maybe they'd land on some remote outpost, eke out a living, salvage what they could. Or maybe they'd discover a gateway to better places. Whichever path they took, it was uncharted, but they'd do it together. That realization sent a hum of courage through his veins. When they woke next, the ship was approaching a brilliant nebula, shimmering with blues and golds like cosmic fire. Sarah slowed their approach. They gazed at the phenomenon through the cockpit's viewport. Tendrils of luminescent gas swirled gracefully, dotted with the faint sparkle of newborn stars. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He'd wandered the galaxy for years, chasing scraps of salvage, always feeling aimless. Now he saw the universe in a new light, mysterious, alive, breathtaking. Sarah reached back, tangling her fingers in his. He squeezed gently, letting wonder replace fear. For a long moment they floated there, transfixed, two souls who had found each other among the wreckage of countless worlds. Then a sensor beeped. A blinking light on the console indicated a small station or outpost hidden in the nebula's outskirts. It was faint, probably abandoned or on minimal power. Could be a trap, or could be a place to rest. Exchanging a glance, they nodded. The translator beeped alive, capturing Sarah's words. "Together?" Marcus answered aloud. "Always." She caught the essence of his reply, a smile curving her lips. The ship pivoted gracefully, thrusters firing as they glided toward the unknown structure. And in that leap of faith, they sealed the union, forging onward into the labyrinth of stars, hearts beating in tandem, minds woven by fate's merciful twist, and the knowledge that whatever awaited them, they would face it side by side. He stood in the open airlock of the small outpost, inhaling recycled oxygen that smelled like dust and rust. Sarah was beside him, scanning the corridor with a handheld device. The outpost was ancient, evidently deserted for decades if not centuries. Rust clung to catwalks, half the lights were out, and the place echoed with each step. Yet a few systems still functioned, enough for them to dock and run life support. They'd come here in search of extra supplies or a short respite. Instead, they found a mausoleum of half-forgotten technology and stale memories. Drifting through the corridors, they discovered old living quarters with broken bunk frames, a kitchen filled with moldy containers, and a calm station that beat forlornly, still waiting for a transmission that never came. Marcus fiddled with the comm, but it was hopelessly outdated, unconnected to any modern network. Still, he couldn't help feeling a pang of empathy for whoever once called this place home. Syrah crouched near a dusty console, brushing cobwebs aside. She plugged in the translator, and a faint green screen flickered. Lines of alien script scrolled by, occasionally phasing into half-translated English. She murmured a series of clicks. The translator offered. This outpost was for travelers, refuge. Then war came. A sigh escaped Marcus's lips. Everywhere they went, they found relics of conflict, abandoned places, fractured societies. He wanted to find something hopeful, a sign that not all corners of the galaxy were shaped by devastation. Turning to Syrah, he asked softly, "Should we stay or go?" She tapped more lines, the translator humming. "Some supplies remain. We gather, then move on." He nodded, resisting the urge to gather her into an embrace. But she sensed his lingering sadness through their bond, stepping close to place a hand on his shoulder. Comfort flooded him. She was here, and that was enough for now. They found a small storage bay in the outpost's lower level, surprisingly intact. Inside were sealed crates of rations, water canisters, and a few spare components that might help their ship. Marcus picked up a musty container labeled in a language he didn't recognize. Syrah examined it and nodded, indicating it was safe. They loaded supplies onto a hovering pallet they'd brought. The quiet task felt almost domestic, like a couple gathering groceries, albeit in a decrepit space outpost. He found himself chuckling at the absurdity. Syrah glanced over, an eyebrow raised in question. He waved a hand as if to say, "It's nothing." But the moment made him realize just how far they'd come, two strangers from different worlds, working side by side with unspoken synchronicity. They were forging a semblance of normalcy in a chaotic universe. Maybe that was love, carving out a sanctuary amid the turmoil. As they headed back to their ship, a sudden clang reverberated. Marcus spun, pulse pounding. Syrah raised her scanning device. Footsteps echoed beyond an intersection. Could the mercenaries have tracked them here? Unlikely, but the possibility made his skin crawl. They set down the pallet. He drew his pulse pistol while Syrah activated her bracers. Step by cautious step, they advanced. The corridor forked. One way led back to the airlock, the other to an unexplored sector. The clang repeated. It sounded like metal scraping metal. Heart pounding, Marcus gestured for Syrah to stay behind him. She shook her head, stepping forward. They moved in tandem, each covering the other. The corridor ended in a large chamber with a partially collapsed ceiling. In the corner, a figure hunched over a crate, rummaging through its contents. The figure was short, clad in tattered clothes, face obscured by a hood. Marcus leveled his gun. "Who are you?" he demanded in the universal language of tension, though he doubted they spoke English. The figure jolted, dropping something with a metallic clang. They turned. Syrah let out a soft gasp. The translator caught the figure's trembling voice. "Don't shoot. I'm just scavenging." Marcus lowered his pistol slowly. The figure's hood slipped back, revealing a pale, gaunt face. Not fully human. Their eyes were large and nocturnal. Possibly another alien. He or she raised trembling hands. "Please! I've been trapped here." The translator stuttered, missing some words. But the message was clear: they were another castaway, surviving on scraps. Reluctantly, Marcus and Syrah approached. The alien repeated a halting plea. Syrah's expression softened. She typed into the translator. "We mean no harm." The alien exhaled in relief, clearly terrified. Over the next few minutes, they learned that the alien, calling themselves Sev, had been stranded when their ship malfunctioned. They arrived here hoping to salvage parts but got stuck. The outpost's power had degraded, leaving them with no way to recharge. They'd been surviving on whatever was left in these crates. Marcus's heart clenched. He recognized the desperation in Sev's eyes, so similar to his own reflection before he met Syrah. Could they leave this being behind to starve or die alone? Syrah's gaze told him she felt similarly. They were both outcasts, now forging a new path. Perhaps they could help. Sev stared at them warily. Your ship, it flies? They asked through the translator, hope trembling in their voice. Marcus and Syrah exchanged a silent conversation of looks and mental nudges. Their vessel was small, but maybe it could fit 3 if they adjusted the cargo space. Then again, this was a risk. Sev was a stranger. Could they be trusted? Syrah touched Marcus's arm, sending a faint wave of calm. She typed, "We can try to help." Sev's eyes watered with gratitude. And so, once again, the two found themselves offering refuge, an ironic echo of how they first met. They escorted Sev to their ship, tension swirling. Marcus kept a firm hand on his sidearm, just in case. But Sev seemed too frail and malnourished to pose much threat. Syrah gave them a small ration bar, which they devoured hungrily. Adjusting the craft for a third occupant took some doing. Marcus jerry-rigged a makeshift seat in the cramped cargo area. All the while, Sev hovered anxiously, as if expecting to be thrown out. Syrah managed to convey basic guidelines: no tampering with the controls, no sudden movements. Sev nodded wide-eyed. The ship's biotech recognized neither friend nor foe in Sev. But it allowed a passenger seat once Syrah overrode a few protocols. Marcus felt a swirl of uncertainty. They'd only just begun forging their own path. Was it wise to add a variable? But Syrah's calm presence reassured him. She typed a private note on the translator. "You helped me when I was a stranger." That was all she needed to say. He recalled that first day in the derelict station. She'd been behind a force barrier, vulnerable, or so he thought at the time. He'd extended trust, and it changed both their lives. Maybe Sev deserved that chance, too. When all was ready, they launched from the outpost, leaving its rusted halls behind. Sev curled up in the cargo seat, trembling with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Marcus and Syrah resumed their positions in the cockpit. The nebula's swirling lights enveloped them once more. This time, they navigated deeper, following star charts gleaned from the outpost's memory banks. The route was indirect, but it led toward rumored trade lanes. They flew in silence, the hum of the ship lulling them. Occasionally, Marcus glanced back at Sev, who sat with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the advanced biotech of the craft. Syrah, sensing his worry, gave him a small, encouraging smile. Through their bond, she sent reassurance that they could handle whatever came next. Marcus exhaled, letting tension drain. He couldn't deny that the presence of a third party felt strange, like an intrusion on the fragile intimacy he shared with Syrah. But he also couldn't ignore the relief on Sev's face. Maybe this was the right thing. While Syrah piloted, Marcus ran diagnostics. The stealth field held steady, power usage was stable, and the hull was secure. They'd faced so many close calls, it was surreal to have a moment of relative calm. He stared out the viewport at the cosmic tapestry of swirling dust and gas. A faint sense of wonder filled him. Here he was, half a galaxy away from Earth, in an alien biotech ship, with an alien partner he was bonded to, and now offering safe passage to a stranger from another species. Life had taken some unexpected turns. Yet for the first time, he felt purposeful, as though he belonged in this bizarre puzzle. He gently laid a hand on Syrah's shoulder, and she covered it with hers, a mutual acknowledgement of their bond. In a single glance, they communicated the depth of their affection and the acceptance of this new journey. The translator was silent, but they needed no words. The station was behind them, the outpost a memory, the mercenaries hopefully stuck in their steel cage. Ahead lay the uncertain horizon of stars. As the craft drifted through the nebula's final tendrils, Marcus closed his eyes. A calm voice in his mind, equal parts his own and Syrah's echo, reminded him that no matter what they found, they would face it together. The glimmering dust of the nebula gave way to open space, dotted with distant star systems. Marcus guided Syrah in making calculations for the best route forward. Sev, to their credit, remained mostly silent, occasionally asking the translator cautious questions about where they were headed. The short answer was, "We're not sure." Yet the bond between Marcus and Syrah felt stronger every day, an anchor in the swirling chaos. They took turns resting, though the cramped quarters allowed little privacy. At first, Marcus was wary of revealing too much intimacy in front of Sev, but Syrah didn't seem troubled. She'd always been quietly self-assured. They shared subtle touches and glances that radiated warmth, a silent testament to their closeness. Sev's eyes shone with a mix of admiration and envy, as if they'd never seen two individuals so at ease together. Marcus wondered if their bond was visible in subtle ways, like a glow on Syrah's ridges or an aura of calm that enveloped them both. Days, if the concept even applied, passed in a rhythmic cycle of navigation checks, resource management, and cautious exploration of star charts gleaned from the outpost. They came across a faint signal broadcasting from a remote region. It was in Syrah's language, though archaic. The translator picked up fragments. Haven, survivors, approach with caution. Hope spiked in Marcus's chest. Could this be a beacon from her people? Or from an allied race that might welcome them? They adjusted course. Sev grew restless, muttering about the dangers of unknown signals. But Marcus and Syrah agreed it was worth investigating. Where else could they go? The source lay on the edge of a system with a dim red star. The ship's scanners revealed a station or habitat orbiting a barren planet. It was small, barely reflecting any power output. They approached stealthily, hearts pounding. As they neared, they made out a honeycomb structure attached to an asteroid. Solar panels bristled along its surface, many shattered or misaligned. Syrah's ridges glowed with apprehension. She engaged a minimal docking procedure. The structure responded, allowing them to land on a docking ring that seemed functional enough. Marcus felt his pulse hammer. If this was indeed a remnant of Syrah's civilization, it could be a turning point, or a disappointment. They stepped out of the craft, with Sev trailing behind, wide-eyed. The station's interior was dim, lit by emergency lights casting flickering shadows on the walls. Syrah's eyes adjusted quickly, her species evidently adapted to low light. She led the way through a labyrinth of corridors, each lined with odd, curving architecture. Marcus recognized the style from Syrah's station, fluid designs, organic motifs etched into metal. He felt her excitement and fear through their bond. She was hopeful, but the emptiness unnerved her. Then they heard it, a faint voice echoing through the halls, speaking Syrah's tongue. Syrah broke into a run, ignoring caution. Marcus followed, ignoring Sev's worried calls. They emerged into a large chamber that opened onto a vaulted ceiling. Bioluminescent vines hung from the arches, giving off a pale green glow. At the far end, a tall figure stood, draped in worn robes. Their skin bore patterns similar to Syrah's, though paler. The figure turned, revealing a face lined with age or sorrow. Their eyes widened at the sight of Syrah. A flurry of words passed between them, too fast for the translator. Marcus watched as Syrah practically collapsed into the other's arms, something like relief and grief contorting her features. The older alien murmured softly, stroking Syrah's hair like filaments. Marcus sensed a wave of sorrowful joy from Syrah's mind. This person was kin, maybe family or a revered elder. Sev hung back, fidgeting, uncertain. Marcus approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. Syrah turned, tears glistening in her eyes. She gestured for him to join them. The older alien's gaze fell on Marcus, studying his human form with cautious curiosity. Syrah said something to them, gesturing to Marcus, then placing a hand over her heart. A flicker of recognition passed across the older alien's features, as if they just understood that the bond was real. A heavy sigh escaped them. Marcus felt the weight of an ancient sadness. The alien beckoned him closer, placing a trembling hand on his chest. Then, with surprising warmth, they embraced him. A jolt of shock coursed through Marcus, but the gesture felt profoundly welcoming. Moments later, the older alien introduced themselves through the translator as Tehran, the last caretaker of this haven. Their voice shook with emotion as they explained that only a few of their kind had survived a cataclysmic war. The rest scattered or perished. This haven was once a refuge, but the years had not been kind. Tehran maintained minimal life support, hoping for any sign of their kin's survival. When Syrah spoke of her station, of the stasis that had preserved her, Tehran cried openly, shoulders shaking with sorrow and relief. Marcus, though unable to follow every word, felt the heartbreak in the air. He placed a steadying hand on Syrah's back, offering silent support. Sev watched from a distance, quiet and respectful. In the days that followed, they settled into the haven. Tehran insisted they stay, showing them meager living quarters. The place was threadbare but had an otherworldly beauty, arcing corridors lined with luminescent vines, small chambers for meditation or rest. Marcus recognized the hallmarks of a culture that once revered natural harmony, blending organic and technological elements seamlessly. It reminded him of Syrah's station, except this one was still barely alive with a flicker of communal spirit. Tehran shared tales of their civilization's downfall, rival factions, unstoppable weapons, cosmic storms. They survived by scattering to hidden outposts. Many were lost. Syrah and Marcus sat in solemn silence as they listened, hearts heavy. The translator bridged the language gap, though sometimes the sorrow in Tehran's voice spoke louder than words. One night, after an emotionally charged discussion of how to rebuild, Syrah and Marcus found themselves alone in a small alcove draped with shimmering vines. Syrah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She leaned against Marcus, letting him hold her. He stroked her back, sensing how this reunion with her kin stirred both joy and heartbreak. "We found someone," she managed through the translator, though many of her words were halting. "But so many are gone." Marcus pressed a soft kiss to her hairline. "We can help them," he murmured, knowing she understood the intent. If there were more survivors scattered among the stars, they could search together, bring them here to this haven, or find a safer world. That was a tall order, though. Resources were scarce, and threats lurked everywhere. Still, as the vine's glow bathed them, he felt her heart beating in tandem with his. Through their bond, he sensed a flicker of resolve. Their union had proven that bridging differences was possible. If they could unite a human and an alien caretaker, maybe they could unite the remaining fragments of her species. They had no illusions about the difficulty, but they had hope. And they had each other. Leaning in, she kissed him softly, letting the moment's tenderness wash away fear. He reciprocated, hands framing her face as he poured silent promises into that kiss. This was their future now, tied to more than just survival, tied to the possibility of rebuilding an entire heritage. They emerged from that alcove ready to stand beside Tehran, to share what little knowledge and resources they possessed. Sev, who had been wandering the corridors, seemed both awed and intimidated by the sudden sense of purpose swirling around them. Marcus reassured them with a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Stick with us," he said, half grinning. "We've got big plans." The translator spit out a garbled version, but Sev's small smile indicated they understood. Over the next few days, they helped Tehran repair parts of the haven's power grid, using the components from their ship's cargo. They reactivated sections of the habitat that had been sealed off. Day by day, the place brightened, vines growing lusher as water circulated again. Tehran demonstrated a tradition of seed singing, soft lullabies that apparently stimulated the bioluminescent plants. Syrah joined, voice blending in haunting harmony. Marcus watched with rapt wonder, feeling the gentle vibrations echo in his chest. In stolen moments, he and Syrah found each other in quiet corners, reaffirming their bond. Though they were no longer alone in a derelict station, their closeness felt unbreakable. They snatched kisses when they could, laughed at Sev's wide-eyed curiosity, and marveled at the new path unfolding. Soon, the time came to make a decision: remain in the haven to help Tehran rebuild, or venture out to search for more survivors, gather resources, possibly contact other species for alliances. Tehran was determined to stay, too old and weary to travel. But they offered blessings should Syrah and Marcus choose to embark on a quest. The thought of leaving this peaceful haven so soon weighed on them. Yet they knew they couldn't hide away forever while the rest of the galaxy burned or drifted aimlessly. One final evening, they held a small ceremony in a central hall. Tehran said words of encouragement in the old tongue. Syrah stood beside Marcus, ridges glowing softly, eyes shining with resolve. The translator captured only fragments, but the gist was clear: they were forging a new family, a new era. The corridor echoed with the hum of ancient songs. Sev, wearing a borrowed robe, watched from the side, reverent. Marcus squeezed Sarah's hand, and she squeezed back, hearts thudding in unison. Tomorrow they'd depart. They'd leave Tehran with improved systems, a chance to welcome any wandering survivors. And they would go forth into the starry expanse, searching for the scattered embers of a lost civilization, carrying the memory of human resilience and alien grace. Perhaps they'd fail. Perhaps they'd never find others. But in the hush of that final night, lying tangled in Sarah's embrace, Marcus felt something he'd rarely known, the certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, with the only being he could imagine sharing his future. Their lips met in a slow, tender kiss, a silent vow to each other and to the destiny they'd chosen. The battered man and the alien caretaker, bound by love that transcended galaxies, stepping into a tomorrow that, for the first time, didn't feel lonely. They left the haven at dawn, if dawn could be said to exist in artificial day cycles. Tehran stood in the docking bay, leaning on a staff carved with intricate patterns, tears in their wise old eyes. Sarah embraced her elder, whispering her farewell. Sev boarded the ship, settling into the cargo seat with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Marcus bowed his head respectfully to Tehran. The older alien placed a hand on his chest, murmuring something that the translator captured imperfectly. Guard her, guard each other. You are hope. Marcus swallowed a lump in his throat, nodding. Then, with Sarah's slender fingers twined in his, he entered the vessel. The hatch sealed. Through the viewport, they saw Tehran recede as the craft lifted off, thrusters humming. A swirl of emotion gripped Marcus, sadness at leaving behind the first taste of real community, tempered by determination to do what needed doing. They angled away from the asteroid station, heading into open space once more. Sarah guided them toward the jump gate coordinates gleaned from the haven's archives. The biotech console glowed beneath her hands, filaments dancing in response to her neural link. Marcus, seated behind her, felt the gentle hum of her presence in his mind. Their bond was a constant reassurance. He could sense her excitement, her apprehension, her readiness to face whatever lay ahead. Occasionally, Sev piped up with a question, and Marcus or Sarah answered as best they could. The days of travel stretched before them. He wasn't entirely sure how this quest would unfold. Perhaps they'd face more mercenaries, or maybe corporate raiders, or even the remnants of the war that shattered Sarah's people. But he knew they wouldn't face it alone. One afternoon, when Sarah rested, Marcus found himself gazing at her sleeping form in the pilot's seat. She looked peaceful, silver-laced skin catching the cockpit's muted lights. The ridges along her neck and arms were subdued, as though she was in a deep dream state. Through the bond, he felt the gentle swirl of her subconscious, images of her homeworld, vistas of purple skies, sorrowful echoes of a once thriving people. He reached out and brushed a strand of her hair like filaments aside, heart swelling with affection. She stirred, blinking awake, and gave him a sleepy smile. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. For a moment, they simply held each other's gaze, exchanging silent vows of devotion. Then the console beeped, alerting them to a gravitational anomaly ahead. Duty called. As the ship navigated the starlit paths, they began to pick up faint signals, some in unknown languages, others in battered standard. They debated whether to investigate or stick to their route. Ultimately, they decided that if a signal sounded promising, they'd check it out, no sense ignoring potential allies. Yet caution was paramount. The memory of the mercenaries still stung. They stumbled onto a drifting cargo vessel once, scanning it for signs of life, but it turned out to be empty, automated systems still broadcasting an SOS for a crew long dead. Sarah insisted on salvaging a few parts that might help with future repairs, so Marcus ventured aboard with her while Sev stayed in the cockpit, on alert. The cargo ship's corridors were eerily reminiscent of his earliest days, scouring derelicts for anything of value. This time, though, he wasn't alone. He had Sarah, her every movement purposeful, her presence a comfort in the gloom. They moved like a well-rehearsed team, scanning compartments, exchanging quiet banter that the translator occasionally turned into comedic nonsense. At one point, Syrah teased him about his recurring habit of banging his shoulder on low-hanging conduits, a mismatch for his taller frame. He teased back that at least he didn't glow in the dark. Their laughter echoed in the silent halls, a bright spark amidst deathly stillness. Returning to their ship, they discovered that Sev had detected a new signal. This one was faint, distorted by cosmic background noise, but it repeated an alien phrase that the translator loosely rendered as "Gathering point, old domain, coordinates." Syrah's ridges flared with excitement. Could this be a rendezvous for her scattered people? She keyed in the coordinates. Near the edge of known space, a region rumored to be filled with anomalies and war remnants. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Danger likely lurked there. But Syrah's hope was too precious to ignore. He clasped her hand, nodding in agreement. They set a course, bracing themselves for what they might find. The final days of travel were fraught with anticipation. The bond between Marcus and Syrah felt more vibrant than ever. Their stolen moments of affection were sweet and urgent, a reminder of what they were fighting for, a future not just for themselves, but for any survivors of her people who still wandered the void. Even Sev's demeanor softened, trusting them enough to share bits of personal history. They'd once been a trader's apprentice, lost everything when pirates destroyed their convoy. Now, traveling with Syrah and Marcus gave them a newfound sense of belonging. Marcus marveled at how they'd become an unlikely family, each with scars, each searching for a place to heal. Finally, the coordinates loomed on the navigation display, pulsing in time with an automated beacon. As they drew closer, sensor readings revealed a swirling nexus of debris, asteroid fragments, drifting wrecks from ancient battles, radiation pockets. The beacon emanated from the heart of this chaos. Anxiety twisted Marcus's gut. The risk was immense. But Syrah's resolve shone through the bond, a clarion call urging him on. Gently, she guided the ship into the labyrinth. Their stealth field shimmered as she maneuvered between hulks of destroyed vessels. Occasionally, a sensor beeped, warning of dangerous radiation flares. They pressed on, hearts thudding. At last, they emerged into a pocket of open space at the Nexus's center. A single structure floated there, half buried in drifting rock. It looked like a station, though battered and partially collapsed. They approached cautiously. Lights flickered inside, a sign of minimal life support. Syrah scanned for organic readings. There were faint signatures, too weak to confirm identity. She exchanged a hopeful glance with Marcus. If her people were in there, they might be on the brink of extinction. They landed the ship in a rickety docking bay, suits and bracers at the ready. Sev insisted on coming, determined to prove their worth. Marcus nodded. Together, the three ventured inside. What they found was a tomb of sorts, corridors shattered by ancient blasts, flickering overhead lights casting everything in an unearthly glow. Broken symbols lined the walls, reminiscent of Syrah's language. She touched them reverently, as if touching the bones of her ancestors. They inched forward, guided by the faint traces of life signs. The path led to a large chamber reminiscent of a ceremonial hall. At its center lay a cluster of pods, some cracked, others intact. Inside one of the cracked pods, they saw the remains of an alien form, limbs contorted in a death pose. Syrah stifled a cry. Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders, bracing her. Then movement, one of the pods hissed open. A figure emerged, weak, trembling. Another caretaker, by the look of it, though even thinner and more disoriented than Tehran. When they saw Syrah, they gasped, tears welling. Syrah rushed forward, helping them stand. More pods hissed, revealing half a dozen survivors, each in various states of frailty. Marcus and Sev immediately fetched water from their packs. The survivors drank greedily, voices hoarse with disuse. Through the translator, Syrah spoke gently, urging them to stay calm, that they were safe. They recognized her as kin. The scene was equal parts heartbreaking and miraculous. She was no longer the last caretaker. There were others, if only a handful, still clinging to life. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes as he saw Syrah gather them in a shaky embrace. He sensed the overwhelming swirl of relief, sorrow, and renewed purpose coursing through her. This was why they'd come. This was the beginning of a resurrection, no matter how small. He knelt beside them, offering what comfort he could, noticing how they looked at him with curiosity mixed with gratitude. Syrah murmured something in her language, likely explaining their bond, the role he played in saving her. The survivors nodded, some even managing smiles. He felt a gentle hand touch his cheek, a sign of acceptance. In that moment, the hush of the chamber buzzed with possibility. This handful of survivors might be the start of a revival. They would need medical care, resources, a safe place to rebuild. And, by the stars, Marcus vowed he'd help provide it. They spent the next hours stabilizing the survivors. Sev used their trading experience to assess the station's meager supplies. Syrah and Marcus coaxed the battered life support system into producing enough oxygen. Through the bond, Marcus felt Syrah's fierce determination. She had found lost members of her kind, and she would not abandon them. In that half-ruined hall, they planned a journey back to the haven, where Tehran waited. If all went well, they'd bring these survivors, nurse them to health, then chart a new path for the entire species. It was an immense undertaking, but in the hush of that cosmic graveyard, it felt undeniably right. Marcus glanced at Syrah, heart swelling with love. Against all odds, they'd forged a family that transcended species and built a foundation for rebirth. When Syrah met his gaze, her eyes glowed with a quiet radiance. No words were spoken, but he felt her silent vow echo in his mind: "We are one, and we will keep going, together." Outside the station, the debris fields drifted, starlaced silent witnesses to their fragile, determined hope. And in the arms of his alien beloved, Marcus found a sense of belonging that dwarfed any fear, forging a future bright as the cosmic dawn.